All right, here we are going to wrap up part two of the Odyssey. I'm going to walk you through some of part two, summarize, point out some important areas from part two, and then we will be done with the Odyssey. So, again, this is part two of the Odyssey. I'd like for you to look at this image here. This is going to be an image of Athena, and this is Odysseus, but he does not look like our arrogant, cocky hero with hubris. She's actually turning him into an old beggar man right here. And she does this in part two. She disguises him to see if anybody will be respectful of a stranger. Because remember, custom is to honor strangers. That's hospitality. And so Odysseus is going to test several people to see if they're hospitable toward him. One of them being Penelope. And then he's going to test the suitors. So yes, Penelope, his wife, is going to pass the test of being hospitable, but the suitors, they're not hospitable towards Odysseus. They actually treat him very poorly, as they think he is a homeless beggar man. All right, so moving into part two, the return of Odysseus. So in the hero's journey, this would be the homecoming. This is when he gets back home and he's trying to figure out what's going on. He says, 20 years gone and I'm back again. Odysseus has finished telling his story to the Phaeacian king. The next day, the young Phaeacian noblemen conduct him home by ship. So basically, the Phaeacian king gives him all this gold, and he clothes him in all these royal cloths, and he gives him a ship, and he sends him on to Ithaca. Odysseus arrives in Ithaca after an absence of 20 years. The goddess Athena appears and informs him of the situation at home. Numerous suitors, believing Odysseus to be dead, has been continually seeking the hand of his wife, Penelope, in marriage while overrunning Odysseus's palace and enjoying themselves at Penelope's expense. Moreover, they are plotting to murder Odysseus's son, Telemachus, before he can inherit his father's lands. Telemachus, who, like Penelope, still hopes for his father's return, has journeyed to Pylos in Sparta to learn what he can about his father's fate. Athena disguises Odysseus as a beggar and directs him to the hut of Eumaeus, Odysseus's old and faithful swineherd. While Odysseus and Eumaeus are eating breakfast, Telemachus arrives. Athena then appears to Odysseus. And so here, Odysseus is told by Athena, it's time to see your son. And so she ends up turning Odysseus back into himself. Saying no more, she tips her golden wand upon the man, talking about Odysseus, making his cloak pure white and the knit tunic fresh around him, lithe, which means light on his feet, and young she made him, ruddy with sun, his jawline clean, the beard no longer gray upon his chin, and she withdrew when she had done. The Lord Odysseus reappeared, and his son was thunderstruck. All right, so you have to think about Telemachus here. He hasn't seen his dad in 20 years. He doesn't know what his dad looks like. He's never met his father, of course, because when he's a newborn, he's not going to remember his father. And he's been waiting for him all this time. And so now he's seeing Odysseus for the first time. And of course, he's going to have a little bit of denial, like, how can you be my father? Also, you were just a beggar dressed in rags, and now you're not. Like, you must be a god. All right, so Telemachus kind of thinks that he's being tricked here. And Odysseus says, I'm not a god, no god. Why take me for a god? No, I am that father whom your boyhood lacked and suffered pain for lack of. I am he. And so Odysseus, tells him, hey, I'm your dad. Telemachus is still in denial. You cannot be my father, Odysseus. Meddling spirits conceive this trick to twist the knife in me. Because you have to think, Telemachus just got back from a long trip looking for his father. So he's like, I can't handle anything else. This is just too much. And Odysseus replies back. He says, this is not princely to be swept away by wonder at your father's presence. No other Odysseus will ever come, for he and I are one, the same. His bitter fortune and his wanderings are mine. 20 years gone, and I'm back again on my own island. As for my change of skin, that is a charm Athena, hope of soldiers, uses as she will. She has the knack to make me seem a beggar man sometimes, and sometimes young with finer clothes about me. It is no hard things for the gods of heaven to glorify a man or bring him low. So he's saying the gods can help a man in his highest of highs, or they can help him in his lowest of lows. And Athena has definitely helped Odysseus right now. When he had spoken, down he sat. Then throwing his arms around this marvel of a father, Telemachus began to weep. So he accepts Odysseus right here. He hugs him. He cries. And again, we have Homer telling us here, because remember in part 2, Homer is our narrator. We have Homer telling us that we have another man crying. So it's okay to cry. Like, let's defy society's standards of saying men can't cry. Go ahead and cry. It's okay to show emotion, to show happiness. And so here's a great Homeric comparison. He says, salt tears rose from the wells of longing in both men, and cries burst from both as keen and fluttering as those of the great taloned hawk whose nestlings farmers take before they fly. So it's almost like he compares it to a taloned hawk who's about to let his nestlings out for the first time to fly. So they're just having a really bonding moment between father and son. And so Telemachus, he's like, how did you get here, Dad? What happened? And then Odysseus is like, only plain truth shall I tell you, child. Just like, oh, God, just so much has happened. I ain't got time to tell you right now. He said, the Phaeacians gave me passage as they give other wanderers by night the open ocean. While I slept, they brought me to their cutters, set me down on Ithaca with gifts of bronze and gold and stores of woven things. It's the God's will that I'm here. Athena helped me. But hey, this is an important part. He says, hey, what I want you to do is count the suitors up for me and let me know what men are at arms are there and how many men. So basically Odysseus is like, hey, go count up the suitors and let me know how many of them have weapons. He says, I must put all my mind to it to see if we two by ourselves can take them on, or if we should look round for help. So Odysseus is asking Telemachus to go count the suitors and their weapons, because he wants to see if just he and Telemachus can kill them all. And Telemachus has a really interesting response to this. He says, oh my gosh, you know, I know you're a good fighter. Your fame as a fighting man has echoed in my ears. Like, I've heard many stories about you, Dad, about fighting. But how can two men do battle with a house full in their prime? Meaning in their prime, in the best or most vigorous stage of their lives. Like, you know, for I must tell you, this is no affair of 10 or even twice 10 men, but scores, throngs of them. All right, and then he just goes on to name some of the suitors that are there in the different parts of the country that they're located in. And after Telemachus gets done, he basically says that there are hundreds of suitors at their house, and there's no way that just he and his father, Odysseus, can take on these hundreds of suitors, even though he's heard really good stories about his dad fighting. Telemachus says here, he says, I fear we pay in salt blood for your vengeance. You must think hard if you would conjure up the fighting strength to take us through. So if you're going to come up with a plan, Dad, it better be a good one. Odysseus says, what's funny here is Homer says, Odysseus, who had endured the long war in the sea, answered. So yeah, think about everything that Odysseus has been through. This is probably going to be an easy cakewalk for him. Odysseus says, I'll tell you now, suppose Athena's arm is over us, and Zeus, her father's, must I rack my brains for more? So Odysseus says, well, what if Zeus and Athena are going to help us? Like, this couldn't be any better. Clear-headed Telemachus looked hard and said, those two are great defenders, no one doubts it, but throned in the serene clouds overhead, other affairs of men and gods they have to rule over. Like, well, that's all well and good, but they're really busy. And so here's what Odysseus responds to. And this is important. This is kind of his plan as to what he's going to do to the suitors. He says, before long they will stand to right and left of us in combat, in the shouting. When the test comes, our nerve against the suitors in my hall. Here is your part. At break of day tomorrow, home with you. Go mingle with our princes. The swineherd later on will take me down the portside trail, a beggar by my looks, hangdog and old. If they make fun of me in my own courtyard, let your ribs cage up your springing heart, no matter what I suffer, no matter if they pull me by the heels or practice shots at me to drive me out. Look on, hold down your anger. You may even plead with them by heaven in gentle terms to quit their horseplay. Not that they will heed you, rash as they are, facing their day of wrath. All right, so he's saying, I'm going to be dressed as a beggar, and I'm going to go show up in the courtyard where the suitors are, and I want to see how they treat me. And then he basically says, Telemachus, if they treat me poorly and they try to fight me, which they do actually, he says, I want you to cage up your springing heart no matter what I suffer. So Telemachus is just going to have to sit there and watch his dad get beaten by the suitors, and that's going to be hard. And Odysseus says, you're going to cage up your springing heart. And he's going to say, now is not the time to let your anger out. Like, you're going to have to cage it up and pin it in. And, when you're mad and you're holding in that anger, it's basically going to come to a head at some point and explode. And so that's what happens with Telemachus later on. So here's the rest of Odysseus's plan. He says, now fix the next step in your mind. Athena, counseling me, will give me word, and I shall signal to you nodding. At that point, round up all armor, lances, gear of war left in our hall, and stow the lot away back in the vaulted storeroom. When the suitors miss those arms and question you, be soft in what you say. Answer, I thought I'd move them out of the smoke. They seem no longer those bright arms Odysseus left us years ago when he went off to Troy. Here's where the fire's hot breath came in. They had grown black and drear. One better reason, too, I had from Zeus. Suppose a brawl starts up when you are drunk. You might be crazed and bloody one another, and that would stain your feast, your courtship. Tempered iron can magnetize a man. So he's saying that here, he says, hey, Telemachus, I want you to go put up all of the suitors' weapons, and when they ask, hey, why are you putting up our weapons, just respond with, well, Zeus gave me the idea. What if you get drunk and just start randomly killing each other? Like, that would be dreadful and awful. And so if it came from Zeus, they're probably going to believe Telemachus. And then he tells his son to put 2 broadswords aside and 2 ox-hide shields nearby. Why do you think he's asking him to put 2 aside? Well, they're going to be for him and Telemachus to use against the suitors. He says, now one thing more, if son of mine you are and blood of mine, let no one hear Odysseus is about, neither Laertes nor the swineherd here, nor any slave, nor even Penelope. But you and I alone must learn how far the women are corrupted. We should know how to locate good men among our hands, the loyal and respectful, and the shirkers who take you lightly as alone and young. So it's really important right here. Odysseus doesn't want anyone to know he's home. All right, so only Telemachus knows at this point, well, and of course Athena. He wants to see how people are going to treat him. He wants to see if the women are corrupted, and part of this means, yes, he wants to see if Penelope has cheated on him, because remember, back in the land of the dead, Agamemnon warned Odysseus, and not in your textbook, I just told you this on the side, it's in the unabridged version, but Agamemnon warned Odysseus, hey, my wife cheated on me, and then she turned around and killed me when I got back home from the war, when you return home, make sure Penelope hasn't cheated on you, because she might kill you too. So now he's going to see if the women are corrupted. And by that, he also means the maids. All right, moving on to Argus. Oh, every story needs a sad story about a dog. Long story short is Argus is Odysseus's dog that he got when he was a young puppy right before he left for Troy. He trained him and he had to leave for Troy. And so he was just left to be a good hunting dog, and basically the suitors took advantage of Argus, the dog. And yeah, I know 20 years is a long time for a dog, but this dog has lived for 20 years, and Odysseus is dressed as a beggar with Eumaeus. And as Eumaeus and Odysseus walk to the courtyard where the suitors are, Argus, Odysseus's dog, sees him, and he sighs and he wags his tail. So that tells Odysseus that his dog recognizes who he is. And this section about Argus reveals that Odysseus is sad about the homecoming here. Only his dog recognizes him. He's been anticipating this arrival home for so long. His dog is the only one that recognizes him. And also it reveals how the suitors have treated his home, because Argus is actually left out in the mud and the dirt. No one is taking care of Argus. And so here at the end of this episode, it says Eumaeus, this is Odysseus' swineherd, crossed the court and went straight forward into the megaron among the suitors, that's the courtyard. But death and darkness in that instant closed the eyes of Argus, who had seen his master Odysseus after 20 years. So yes, Argus passes away, takes a deep breath, and passes away after he knows his master is home and all is well. All right, this part of Argus is ironic because, just one last thing here, it's ironic because Eumaeus talks to Odysseus about Argus, the dog, and in doing so, he mentions that Odysseus is dead because he does not know he is speaking with Odysseus. So that just kind of goes to show you the mentality of the people at Odysseus's home at this point. Like, some believe he is alive still, some believe that he is dead. All right, moving on. Here's a portrait of Penelope. All right, the suitors. We're in the episode of the suitors. Basically, Antinous is going to be like the cocky suitor of them all. You don't like Antinous, but Odysseus is still disguised as a beggar. Odysseus enters his home. He's confronted by the haughty suitor Antinous. You can see in your footnotes that haughty means arrogant. But here they treat him very, very poorly. They throw things at him. They are disrespectful. Telemachus has to cage up his springing heart and just watch all of it. Penelope runs in and she stops it. And she says, "How dare you treat a guest like this in my house?" And so here, Penelope, she is demonstrating through her actions generous hospitality, because she takes this dirty old beggar man and she's hospitable toward him. And it also just shows you later here, she's going to have a conversation with Odysseus where it reveals that she has been faithful to Odysseus. And so this is in the episode of Penelope here, when Penelope interrogates the old beggar. And when Penelope talks to the beggar, so she tells him about the trick she used to postpone choosing one of the suitors as a husband. So yeah, she's like weaving this portrait of Odysseus's ship, and she tells the suitors when she's done with it, she'll pick one of them to marry. But every night before she goes to bed, she actually unravels the portrait, so she never finishes it. And so during the day she weaves, but during the evening she unravels what she has done. So basically she's stalling until Odysseus comes home, and Odysseus discovers this, and he discovers that she has been loyal to him the whole time. So guess what? He's not going to kill her. So yay. Even though Odysseus hasn't really been faithful to her. Not that that matters in this epic, but, you know. All right, so moving on. Penelope sets up a challenge. Pressed by the suitors to choose a husband from among them, Penelope says she will marry the man who can string Odysseus's bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axe handle sockets. The suitors try and fail. Still in disguise, Odysseus asks for a turn, and he gets it. So the only person that can string Odysseus's bow and arrow is, drumroll please, Odysseus. So here, Odysseus, you know, he knows he's the only one that can string his bow. And so all these suitors are trying to string the bow, and they just don't have the strength to do it. And then Odysseus, the beggar, you know, is like, "Let me try." And they start making fun of him, Odysseus dressed as the beggar, because they're like, "An old man, you're weak. You can't string this bow." But Odysseus does. And so, you know, why does Penelope take Odysseus's hunting bow to the hall where the suitors are? Well, she knows only Odysseus can string this bow. She gives the suitors an impossible task to choose whom she will marry. She tells them that she will marry the person who can string Odysseus's old bow and then use it to shoot an arrow through 12 axe heads in one shot. So not only do they have to string Odysseus's bow, they have to shoot it through 12 axe head handles, which is a big deal. And so here Odysseus, dressed as a beggar, he strings the bow, and Athena changes him back to Odysseus, and he's like, "Look at me now. What? I'm back." And he shoots the bow, and it goes through the 12 axe handle sockets, and then the suitors are like, "Oh crap, it's Odysseus." And so this is when the slaying of the suitors begins. This is the episode called Odysseus's Revenge. It says, "Now shrugging off his rags, the wiliest fighter of the islands leapt and stood on the broad door sill, his own bow in his hand. He poured out at his feet a rain of arrows from the quiver and spoke to the crowd. So much for that. Your clean-cut game is over. Now watch me hit a target that no man has hit before. If I can make this shot, help me, Apollo. And so Odysseus is like, y'all's bad deeds are done. Now watch me and see if I can hit this shot. And I like this part because it's pretty quirky. And I like Odysseus in this part. It says, he drew to his fist the cruel head of an arrow for Antinous. Like he's about to take this arrow and stick it right through Antinous. Just as the young man leaned to lift his beautiful drinking cup, and Baal's two-handled golden, the cup was in his fingers, the wine was even at his lips. And did he dream of death? How could he, in that revelry amid his throng of friends, who would imagine a single foe, though a strong foe indeed, could dare to bring death's pain on him and darkness on his eyes? Odysseus's arrow hit him under the chin and punched up to the feathers through his throat. Backward down he went, letting the wine cup fall from his shocked hand. Like pipes, his nostrils jetted crimson runnels, a river of mortal red, and one last kick upset his table, knocking the bread and meat to soak in dusty blood. All right, so Odysseus has taken this arrow. He has shot it through Antinous' throat, all right, as he's taking a sip of wine. And it's like Antinous didn't have a care in the world. He didn't even see this coming. And so it hits him through the throat. He drops his wine. He's got blood pouring through his nostrils. We have a good allusion here, talking about, like, you know, the bread and wine when you take in communion. Here, the bread falls into the blood and it gets soaked into the blood. And so here Homer gives us this very interesting imagery of how Antinous' death has occurred. And so it's kind of eerie, as we would say. All right, again, Odysseus, he kills them all. And let's see, Antinous, the reason he dies first is because he mistreats the beggar. Odysseus dressed as a beggar by calling him horrible names. He throws a stool at him. And Odysseus, he even says before he starts killing them, another suitor is going to try to say, hey, don't kill us. It's not our fault. And Odysseus is going to give them 4 reasons of why he is going to kill them. And he says that the first reason is they plundered his home. Or actually gives them 3 reasons, sorry. The first reason is they plundered his home. They corrupted the maids of his house, like they slept with the maids. And lastly, they tried to marry his wife. And so they've just really messed up, and there is no going back. And so Eurymachus, this other suitor, he tries to justify his actions, and he blames it all on Antinous. Of course, you're going to blame it on the dead guy. The dead guy can't speak for himself. And so Eurymachus tries to save his own life and the lives of the other suitors by saying they were following the dead guy, Antinous, who was alive at the time, who whipped them up to do all of these terrible tasks. And he also says that he and the other suitors will repay Odysseus for what they've wasted from his household costs, and they apologize. And Odysseus doesn't take heed to this. He's not listening. And so Odysseus's reply to Eurymachus is basically that he doesn't care about these things. He's going to kill him anyway. And he does. It's a very bloody battle. And so Odysseus has several people help him fight the suitors. He has Telemachus, his son. He has Eumaeus, the swineherd. He has Philodeus, who is the cowherd. And then Athena, of course, helps him because she gives him a flying shield. But all of the maids and Penelope have been locked in like a storeroom closet, so they can't get out. So they're not exposed to any of this. But the outcome of the battle between Odysseus and the suitors is that Odysseus' side wins. So basically it's Odysseus, Telemachus, Eumaeus, and Philodeus, and then Athena kind of gives them some help. And that's how they win. But we're still not done. We're almost done, promise. But here, Penelope, after, wait a minute. So here is some good imagery at the end of this. Homer compares the dead bodies of the suitors. He said, Think of a catch that fishermen haul into a half-moon bay in a fine mesh net from the whitecaps of the sea, how all are poured out on the sand in throes for the salt sea, twitching their cold lives away in Helios's fiery air, so lay the suitors heaped on one another. So basically, it's that fish-like imagery again that Homer's using, like a fish out of water. He compares the suitors to dead fish flopping on a beach, like in a pile. So it'd be like getting a big fisherman's net, scooping the fish out and dumping them out in the hot air on the beach and just watching their bodies flop on top of each other. I know, Homer. That's really good imagery. Thanks for that visual. All right, Penelope's test. So lastly, we're almost done, promise. Penelope wants to test Odysseus to make sure it's really him. So basically, long story short, Penelope lies to Odysseus about their bed and their bedroom in such a fake way that Odysseus wouldn't notice her comment, that a fake Odysseus wouldn't notice her comment, but a real Odysseus would know without a doubt that it was impossible. And so what is this exactly? Well, Odysseus built their bed in their bedroom around a tree, and it's called their marriage bed. And so the bed cannot be moved because it's built around this tree. It's kind of like at the head of the bed, not in the middle of the bed. That'd be strange. But it's at the head of the bed, and so the bed cannot be moved. And so basically Penelope's like, why don't you get some rest? I'll take the bed and we'll put it in the living room. And Odysseus gets really mad at her, and he says, how dare you make me sleep in another room when you know our bed cannot be moved, our marriage bed, the one that I built with my hands. He says, woman, by heaven, you've stung me now. Who dared to move my bed? No builder had the skill for that unless a god came down to turn the trick. So basically he's saying nobody could move that bed. And so she realizes it's Odysseus, and then Odysseus is like, why would you test me like that? And Penelope says that she has had to endure many years of imposters and lies throughout Odysseus's absence. And so here, she tests him and she realizes it's him. And then lastly, we have a beautiful ending to this very gory epic. Penelope says, or Homer says, that Penelope rejoiced, her gaze upon her heaven, her white arms round him pressed as though forever, happily ever after the end. But your textbook ends it with, it doesn't end it with all the violence that actually really happens, because Odysseus uses this cyclical violence. He actually kills a lot of people. He kills the maids. He kills the people that were unfaithful to him while he was gone. And so we have this epic about a man's journey home from war, but we end it with violence, which is interesting. So Homer's kind of getting at violence just never really ends. It's just a cyclical process. And so we end the part 2 of the Odyssey.